Costin here with a discussion about Warhammer 3. It has been almost 4 years since this game has come out. It hasn't been quite the same for Immortal Empires, but all the same. This is probably the longest period in Total War history which we've gone without a new game release. Unless you want to consider Pharaoh, and to be honest, Dynasties is pretty good right now, but we're talking about a really big major budget title. And this is also the longest period of development for various bits of content that we've seen for a single game from Creative Assembly. I think Warhammer 3, in a lot of ways, especially quality of life features, is by far and away the best game in the series. And I'm not saying that lightly. Of course, it has been a journey, so to speak, surrounding Warhammer 3. One that will continue with Lords of the End Times, the Cafe DLC before that, and after, I imagine. Though it depends on what Creative Assembly decides to do after Lords of the End Times, because we don't quite know what their plans are. And I think that their plans with the future of Warhammer 3 are kind of up in the air right now, what exactly they're going to do, what kind of DLCs they'll deliver after that one comes out. And that one is likely going to be priced as an expansion and might just be the biggest expansion in Total War history, surpassing even Fall of the Samurai, which was a very good expansion for Shogun 2, one that I personally preferred over the base game. But regardless, on the subject of Warhammer 3, it didn't start off well. I mean, sure, you can argue that development problems due to COVID, but really the design decisions of the game left a lot to be desired. I mean, for instance, consider the Demon Prince. The Demon Prince had a really good prologue campaign, a great tutorial campaign, one that really set the bar for what Creative Assembly could do with these kind of campaigns going forward. But then his actual design in Realms of Chaos left a lot to be desired. And same with virtually every race, except Cafe, and only to an extent. So every single race, every single Legendary Lord was fairly lackluster when Realms of Chaos came out. I mean, I don't need to mention how the Kislev supporter system used to work and how Kislev used to work as a race. And really, that's compounded by the fact that the map itself was not really good. Because you look at the map of Realms of Chaos. Like, you have Scrag in this corner, you have the Demon Prince right here, and then you have a lot of empty territory. Sure, it's been populated by various Legendary Lords since then, but you just end up spending a huge portion of the campaign fighting minor factions, which really isn't a great dynamic. Combine the map with the racial design, the lore design, and then with the actual Realms of Chaos mechanic itself. The problem with the Realms of Chaos mechanic, it was arguably the slowest paced campaign that I've seen in Total War history. Because to complete said campaign, it takes you over 120, 30 turns at minimum. That it might take you longer to do those 4 realms, visit them, and get the souls, deal with the final battle, is a different discussion. That is longer than any other campaign in Total War history. Of course, people can say that they've played longer campaign experiences in Total War, but when you put that as a minimum, it isn't a great design philosophy. And think of what you would do in the Realms of Chaos. You would just fight rogue armies, or maybe 1 or 2 Legendary Lords, give or take, in a realm where you'd get a negative trait. So it would take you, well, it would probably be 1 or 2 turns to even get in the realms. So you either stop before the realms were opening, waiting for them to open. That could be even longer than that. Then you would probably spend 10 or so turns, maybe less, depends on the realm, of course. Corn could be done very quickly. But you could spend more or less. But you would certainly spend at least 5 turns, though. Again, depends. Siege could take long. So that was another issue, and then you would get stuck with a negative trait that would take multiple turns to remove. So essentially what the campaign boiled down to. You'd have 35 turns of a proper campaign, then the realms of open, then you'd send your legendary lord, your best army, into the realms, spend easily 15 turns or so dealing with the realms, prep for the realms, then dealing with the negative trait, and then 20 turns or 15 other turns to just do it over again. That was not a great campaign experience, and it showed in both the player numbers and the retention, like just in general. Realms of Chaos was not popular. It was, in fact, so unpopular that Creative Assembly rushed the release of Immortal Empires. I believe very firmly that Creative Assembly had originally intended to release Immortal Empires slower, about 1 year, give or take. But since Realms of Chaos had gotten such a poor reception, they ended up rushing it, which created its own fair set of issues. Then, when Immortal Empires was released, the player activity retention numbers spiked by a huge amount. In fact, it really was kind of a second release for Warhammer 3. You had a lot of people, and that was also the point where I started doing videos on or videos that got a lot of traction, because I had done Warhammer content or Total War content for years even before that, but that was the point when the YouTube algorithm decided to just blow up for me. It just happened. Right timing, I guess. Proper video on that subject. It's kind of hilarious, you know. But it's saying a lot that what I started doing, the first video that got a lot of views, was me doing a video on the actual recommended campaigns that you should play, and certainly not Miao Ying or Karl Franz initially. There were parts of Immortal Empires that were really good. There were parts that were really bad. The entire Empire situation, for instance, the bad racial design that carried over from Realms of Chaos to Immortal Empires, bugs and glitches and balance problems, quest issues. I'm sure many of us remember how Tyrion couldn't gain his quest item. And some of these issues are still present, but initially it was just a really buggy, broken mess. Ranged issues, Sobal issues, campaign issues, character issues, you name it, Immortal Empires had it. That's the consequence you get when it's launching in a beta that lasts for quite a few months. Of course, Immortal Empires then did get a full proper release with the release of the Forge of Chaos Dwarfs, but all the same, what Creative Assembly had done had not necessarily been the best job. The numbers were there. It could have blown up spectacularly. It did, but then, well, let's just say that all these issues started having a cascade effect on player enjoyment. Not just in 2022, but in 2023 especially. I mean, it worked until basically Forge of Chaos Dwarfs came out, and then numbers started dipping, and then, well, Shadows of Change happened, and Hyenas happened, and Pharaoh happened. Creative Assembly never quite fully recovered from Shadows of Change, and that triple disaster, as I call it, because it is a disaster. I mean, when you think of how big of a disaster, I mean, sure, we have games like Concord and ET, but it is genuinely a huge gaming disaster for a company to lose so much, because they failed in three ways. They failed with Shadows of Change, they failed with Pharaoh, and they failed significantly with Hyenas. So for close to a year, give or take, or less than that actually, it looked okay, not where it should have been, but basically after Shadows of Change, or with Shadows of Change, Creative Assembly kind of just entered the period where it's like, okay, we've done this, we want to move on, we want to spend less money on DLCs, and didn't end up working well for them. So that was really phase one of what you could say, or phase two really. Phase one was before Immortal Empires came out, then you had phase two until 2024, which continues to this day really, because I think we haven't really moved on past the mentality that we saw in 2024 with Thrones of Decay. Certainly, could have been better handled, but we did get some great stuff out of it. We also got certain decisions made by Creative Assembly that didn't necessarily pan out. 2024, we did get the release of Thrones of Decay, which really felt like kind of an apology letter by Creative Assembly, and it did redefine expectations from a DLC. I mean, think of this. We got 3 major racial reworks: Empire, Dwarves, and Nurgle. Sure, Nurgle ended up being the lesser of the 3, but Dwarves are amazing and certainly set a new standard. We did get the free Legendary Lord, we got Legendary Heroes, we got reworks for Karl Franz and Balthasar Gelt as well, giving them unique mechanics and vastly improving their campaigns. I mean, Karl went from being one of the worst Legendary Lords to being one of the best in the game after the release of Thrones of Decay. And the way Creative Assembly has handled content in terms of the quantity of it certainly has remained the same since then. Of course, the racial reworks and Legendary Lord campaigns haven't been the best since then. Like Omens of Destruction didn't quite work out the same way. The Kislev rework was great, but I can't say the same about the Tides of Torment reworks. That's the problem. Like with Thrones of Decay, you really felt like Creative Assembly knew what they were doing and were probably pressured to cut the bullshit and actually deliver. With Omens and with Tides of Torment, not quite so much, but we're still in that same idea of like, we're going to release DLC with free campaigns, we're going to release X amount of content. That has remained the same. We will find out how things change in 2026. So that is phase 3. That is the part we've been in. Sure, it's been slow, and sure, many things have remained unresolved, siege reworks and all that kind of stuff. But Creative Assembly had the right idea, just not necessarily the right execution of it. Though, as far as I'm aware, the reason we didn't necessarily get the best execution is that Creative Assembly decided to put the Pharaoh team to work on Warhammer 3, so Yolosapien ended up working full-time on Warhammer 3. Sure, they have some help from Horsham, but all the same. And that created a lot of issues, because they decided they were going to focus on new releases with their people, with many of the developers, because they have hundreds and hundreds of developers, and we may only have a couple dozen people at most working on Warhammer 3 at the moment. And it certainly shows. Would have been interesting to see had Creative Assembly chosen different. Imagine what kind of campaigns and reworks and mechanic improvements we would have gotten otherwise, because it's certainly showing that reallocation of resources and people, especially developers that have the experience to actually deal with this messy engine. Because the problem with Warhammer 3 is that it's not just Warhammer 3, and it's not just the engine, it's the combination of Warhammer 1, 2, 3 with the engine built on a lot of technical debt. And then you pass that along to people who had not dealt with this before. Of course, it ended up being something of a mess, suffice to say. And as the consequence, that's the sad part of it. Imagine if Creative Assembly had chosen different. I understand the logic of it, but could have been a different experience. We will find out how things are with the Cafe DLC and Lords of the End Times. Questine here, signing out. Stay tuned for more. It has been quite an interesting period for myself as a content creator and a Total War player. I've played the series for over 20 years at this point. Yeah, 20 years. 21, really, at this stage. I started with Rome 1, then Medieval 2, roughly same time. And it has certainly been a series with a lot of ups and downs along the way. I do hope that Creative Assembly has learned the right lessons, but we'll find out on that. Stay tuned.